My earliest memory is of a bus station ceiling fan that never finished a full rotation. It squeaked, stuttered, and tried again, like a creature rehearsing persistence. I was 5, small enough that the plastic seats swallowed my legs, and I was holding a paper cup of water because the woman who had brought me there insisted that thirsty children made inconvenient noise. She kept checking her phone as if the screen could absolve her. Around us, the city of Welleridge woke into wet summer air. Vendors pulling metal shutters up with angry clatter, buses coughing exhaust into the dawn. The woman told me to stay put. She said she would be back in a minute. Minutes, like so many promises, are easy to sell. She walked away without looking behind her, and the fan kept failing its rotation above me, as if it too had been abandoned mid-task. I waited until the cup ran dry and my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Then I waited longer, because children are trained early to confuse obedience with safety. When the woman did not return, the station became a slow disaster. People moved around me as if I were part of the furniture. Security guards glanced over and then away. A man in a uniform asked my name, and I said, truthfully, that I did not know what to answer because the woman had called me different things depending on her mood. The uniformed man sighed like someone presented with a form missing half its fields. He led me to a bench near a kiosk and bought me a sweet bun. Sugar made me quiet. Quiet made me easier. And easy, I learned, was a kind of invisibility. If this story had wanted to be neat, it would have given me a savior in the form of a heroic father or a wealthy aunt who arrived in a clean car at the last second. Instead, it gave me Mara. Mara was my grandmother by blood and my guardian by every other definition. But she did not appear with dramatic music. She arrived hours later with sweat on her brow and a plastic bag of oranges in one hand because the bus driver had told her that children needed vitamin C. Her hair was gray, tied back with a rubber band. Her feet were swollen in cheap sandals. When she saw me, she did not cry or scold or collapse. She simply knelt, took my face between her hands, and asked, in a voice that shook only at the edges, "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. She pulled me into her chest so hard my ribs complained. And then she stood and faced the uniformed man as if the entire station belonged to her. "I am his family," she said. There was no certificate to prove it, no identity card that could convince the world a child belonged somewhere. There was only the way Mara held me, not like luggage, not like obligation, but like a decision. On the bus ride back to our town of Linford, she peeled an orange with careful fingers and fed me slices one by one, as if she could rebuild my trust through citrus and patience. "I am sorry," she said, though she had not been the one who left. Later I would understand that good people apologize for the damage in the world even when it is not their fault, because they would rather fix what is broken than argue about blame. Mara's life had already been narrowed by loss before I arrived. My grandfather died young. My mother, Talia, grew up with a hunger Mara could not fill. Not because Mara did not try, but because some people treat love like a staircase. They only notice it when it leads upward into luxury. Talia left Linford as a teenager with a suitcase and a promise to send money back. She sent nothing but occasional insults, delivered through thin, crackling phone calls that ended whenever Mara asked where she was living. When Talia came back once, briefly, she laughed at our small house and told Mara that raising a boy would be pointless unless he could become useful. Mara ended the call and stared at the wall for a long time, as if trying to locate the moment she had lost her daughter to greed. After the bus station, Talia vanished again, leaving behind only paperwork problems, my missing birth certificate, my lack of registration, my inability to enroll in school. The principal at Linford Primary, a man who measured compassion in stamps, told Mara I could not attend classes without a proper record. Mara nodded as if she accepted the rule, then spent the next month walking from office to office until her knees swelled, asking for copies, forms, exceptions. When one clerk suggested she should just let the child work, Mara's eyes went cold. "He will learn," she said. "If you want to stop him, write your name on the refusal so the whole town can see who chose ignorance." The clerk stamped the document just to end the conversation. That was Mara's first magic. She could turn shame into leverage. Money, however, cared for neither stamps nor dignity. Mara sold what she could: an old ring, a hand-stitched quilt, the small plot of land behind the house that had once held banana trees. When that was not enough, she borrowed from the town cooperative, putting the house itself as collateral. People said she was foolish. "He is not even your son," they whispered. "He is a stray your daughter dropped on your doorstep." Mara responded the way she always did. By working. At dawn, she hauled a cart to the school gates and sold rice porridge with pickled vegetables. She made the portions generous, because she had learned that hungry children behave badly, and she did not want anyone blaming my existence for their irritation. She kept her hands clean and her prices low, which meant profit was slow. By night, she stitched repairs for neighbors. Torn uniforms, ripped curtains, cracked backpack straps. I learned to do small tasks, washing bowls, counting coins, pushing the cart's squeaky wheel over potholes. Mara never called it sacrifice. She called it how we live. When I tried to quit school so I could work full-time, she flicked my forehead with 2 fingers. "You are not allowed to shrink," she said. "We have had enough shrinking." The first big leak arrived the year I turned 9. Not from the sky, but from a person. A man named Vance Hoyt opened a food stall across from Mara's cart. He wore a crisp apron and a friendly grin that never touched his eyes. He sold the same porridge but poured it thinner, and he undercut Mara's price by a small amount that made customers feel clever. Then, one afternoon, a health inspector walked up to Mara's cart with a clipboard and demanded to see her permit. Mara's hands went still. The permit was valid. She kept it sealed in a plastic bag. The inspector looked at it and frowned anyway, as if the paper had insulted him. He began listing violations. A missing hand-washing sign, a bucket placed too close to the cart, a lid that was not properly labeled. Vance watched from his stall like a man enjoying a performance he had paid for. I felt anger rise in my throat. Mara touched my shoulder gently. A silent warning. Do not waste your energy on shouting. Save it for building. She closed her cart early that day. We walked home with the pot still warm and the coins in our pocket light. That night, she told me the truth. In towns like ours, she said, some people do not try to win by doing better. They try to win by making you stop. The next morning, she taped a hand-washing sign to her cart, moved the bucket, and kept selling. She did not beat Vance, not immediately, but she outlasted him. By middle school, I had learned 2 versions of Linford. The first was the version the town advertised: riverside sunsets, friendly markets, a place where everyone knew your name. The second was the version I lived, a place where names could also be shackles, where people remembered your mother's sins and tried to charge you interest. In class, when we wrote family essays, I lied with a confidence that should have scared me. My parents work in the city, I wrote. They are busy but loving. The teacher praised my creativity. I learned that adults often prefer a pleasant lie to an inconvenient truth. At home, Mara did not ask to see my essays. She asked to see my homework. She cared less about stories than about skills. When I came home bruised from a fight with a boy who called me station trash, Mara cleaned my wound and said, "If you fight, fight for the right reason. The right reason is never pride. The right reason is safety." She did not tell me to be gentle. She told me to be strategic. When I was 15, Mara's heart betrayed her for the first time. She did not collapse dramatically. She sat down at the table, pressed a hand to her chest, and said, "Noah, I need you to be calm." Her voice was steady, which made my panic worse. We made it to the clinic in a borrowed truck. The doctor called it a warning. He told her to rest, to avoid heavy lifting, to reduce stress. Mara nodded politely, as if he had offered to change the weather. Rest was a luxury. Stress was the air we breathed. That evening, she put her cart's handles into my hands. "You will push tomorrow," she said. "I will supervise." The next morning, as I hauled the cart over a broken curb, I realized how much of Mara's strength had been hidden in plain sight. Her life had been heavy in small increments. Carrying it had shaped her into a person who refused to drop anything that mattered. I left Linford for university on a scholarship that Mara pretended was inevitable. She told neighbors. Of course he got in, as if my acceptance letter had been delivered by a courier she hired. The night before I left, she cooked my favorite dish, braised fish with tamarind, and placed extra pieces in my bowl like a blessing. "Remember," she said, "you do not owe anyone gratitude for letting you live. You owe yourself the life you worked for." I carried those words like contraband. The campus in Crestwick felt like another country. Buildings that did not leak, libraries that smelled of new paper, students who complained about slow internet as if it were hardship. For the first time, my poverty was not the center of every conversation, which was both freeing and terrifying. Without constant struggle, I did not know who I was, so I built a new struggle. I worked nights in the dining hall, I tutored freshmen, I learned to code until my eyes stung. I treated exhaustion like a rite of passage. During my 3rd year, I built an app that started as a joke and became a lifeline. It was called Shoreline, and it matched surplus food from cafeterias and hotels with shelters and low-income neighborhoods in real time. The idea was simple. Waste is a logistics failure, not a moral necessity. The app used basic routing and volunteer drivers, and it worked because people are often kinder than systems allow. Shoreline grew faster than I expected. Student volunteers came. Local nonprofits called. A city council intern asked if we could scale. I learned a new kind of fear, the fear of being needed. The first time I received a photo of a group of kids eating a hot meal delivered through the app, I cried in a campus stairwell, embarrassed by my own softness. It felt like seeing my own childhood repaired in small pieces. Hope attracts attention. A year after graduation, Shoreline was operating in 3 districts, and a venture group offered funding. Their representative, Calder Wynn, met me at a cafe where the chairs were too small and the coffee tasted like burnt ambition. He wore a watch that projected his calendar like a halo. "We love mission-driven solutions," he said, which is what people say when they want to own your mission. He offered money, marketing, connections. The contract was thick, full of careful language. I took it to a lawyer friend, Lisa Varr, who had grown up in the same kind of town as I had. Lisa read the contract and whistled softly. "They do not want to feed people," she said. "They want to harvest data and sell efficiency to the highest bidder. They will turn your volunteers into unpaid labor and your users into targets." I declined Wynn's offer. The next week, a regulatory complaint appeared in my inbox. Someone reported Shoreline for unsafe food handling. Someone else filed a claim that our drivers needed commercial licenses. It was Vance's tactic again, just bigger, smoother, city-sized. I went to Linford for advice, the way people return to their origin point when the map becomes confusing. Mara was sitting on the porch in late afternoon, her hand wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. She looked smaller than my memory, her shoulders sharper under her blouse. She smiled when she saw me, but it arrived a beat too late. "You did not call," she said. "I wanted to surprise you," I replied. And then I noticed the man standing in the yard. He was tall, silver-haired, with a suit too expensive for our dusty lane. He held a folder like a weapon disguised as stationery. Mara introduced him without warmth. "This is Orson Vale," she said. "He says he is your father." The word father landed like a foreign object. Orson extended a hand. "Noah," he said, voice practiced. "I have been looking for you." Behind him, the neighbor's curtains twitched. Linford loved a spectacle. Orson did not look like a villain. That was the danger. He looked like a man who knew which fork to use and how to make people doubt their own anger. He told a story about youth and mistakes, about not being ready, about being pushed away by circumstances. He never said the name Talia at first. He called her the woman. He said he had tried to help. He said he had been misled. Mara listened without interrupting, her face still. When he finished, she said, "You left a child at a bus station." Orson blinked as if surprised by the bluntness. "I did not know where she took him," he said quickly. Mara tapped her cane once on the porch boards. "You knew enough to stay away," she replied. Then she turned to me. "If you want to speak to him, you may. If you do not owe him your time." That was Mara's second magic. She treated boundaries like law. Orson returned the next day with gifts. A new laptop, a bag of imported fruit, a thick envelope that clinked with the promise of cash. I did not touch any of it. Mara did not touch it either. But gifts have a way of sticking to people even when refused. Neighbors began to speak differently. "Maybe he is not so bad," one said. "Blood is blood," another insisted. As if blood were a contract, Orson began to ask about Shoreline. He asked about money. He asked about my future. The questions were too interested. When I pushed back, he smiled. "I want to be involved," he said. "I want to make up for lost time." In my chest, anger and longing fought, because even abandoned children carry a small, ridiculous wish that the person who left will return changed. But Mara's hand on my shoulder was steady, and that steadiness anchored me. The threat started quietly. A message appeared from an unknown number. "Family is a responsibility, not a choice." Another read, "You cannot outrun your origins." The most chilling one arrived at midnight. "We can make Mara's loan due tomorrow." I stared at the screen, nausea rising. I called the cooperative. The manager sounded uncomfortable. There has been an inquiry, he admitted. A man asked about the terms, said he was family. Orson. I drove to Linford at dawn and confronted him in the yard. He did not deny it. I was trying to help, he said, voice calm. If I pay the loan, you can focus on your work. You do not get to buy my past, I said. Orson's smile thinned. Everything is purchasable, he replied softly. Even loyalty. Orson filed a petition with the county court claiming Mara was financially unstable and therefore incapable of proper guardianship, seeking to establish retroactive control over my assets by reframing my childhood as a mistake Mara had exploited. The paper arrived in an official envelope, thin but heavy with threat. Mara held it and stared for a long time. He thinks you are a bank account, she said. I felt my throat tighten. We fight, I said. Mara nodded. We do not beg, she replied. Lysa drove to Linford that weekend and set up a makeshift legal office on Mara's kitchen table. Dev Rourke, Shoreline's logistics lead and my best friend, came too, bringing a laptop and a deep distrust of anyone who wore a suit. Together we built a wall of documents. Clinic records that proved Mara's care, school forms she had signed, cooperative receipts, photos of our cart, the scholarship letters Mara had kept folded in a tin like treasures. When Orson's lawyer argued that Mara had interfered with parental rights, Lisa asked a single question. Where were you when the child had no paperwork, no food, no home? The lawyer had no answer that did not sound like cruelty. The hearing was held in Crestwick County, a room painted neutral to discourage emotion. Orson arrived with a lawyer and a sympathetic expression. Mara arrived with a cane and the posture of someone who had carried a house on her back. When the judge asked Mara why she had taken on the burden, Mara looked straight ahead and said, because leaving him would have been wrong. Orson's lawyer tried to make her look reckless, foolish, sentimental. Mara did not defend herself with dramatic words. She defended herself with facts. The loan, the cart, the hours, the hospital visits. Then the judge asked me to speak. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I told the simple truth. I had been left. I had been found. I had been raised. Orson watched me like someone calculating profit margins. The judge denied his petition. Orson's smile did not break, but his eyes darkened. Outside the courthouse, he leaned close and murmured, You could have had everything. You chose the old woman. I turned and saw Mara standing alone on the steps, small and unshakable. I chose the person who chose me, I replied. Orson retreated, but not gracefully. In the following weeks, anonymous complaints targeted Shoreline again. A city committee tried to suspend our permit. A vendor association claimed we were undercutting local business. It was bureaucracy used as a club. Elisa advised us to do what powerful people hate, expose. We compiled our accounting, our compliance records, our training modules, and we released them publicly. We invited journalists to observe. We held community meetings and handed out printed summaries. We made our work visible enough that it could not be quietly erased. When a council member tried to smear us in a meeting, Dev stood up and said, If you want to accuse us, do it on the record, with your name attached. Names, again, became leverage. The committee backed down. Spring arrived with a surprise. Mara met someone. Jory Cade was a retired ferry mechanic with hands that smelled faintly of oil and river water. He began showing up to buy tea and stay to fix things that broke in Mara's house. A door hinge, a loose rail, a flickering porch light. Mara pretended not to notice the pattern. I noticed. In the evenings, when I visited, I found them sitting on the porch, speaking quietly, as if sharing a private language of old age and stubbornness. One night Mara cleared her throat and said, Jory asked if I would like to register marriage. She said it like she was discussing weather forecasts. I blinked, then smiled so hard my face hurt. Yes, I said. You should. Mara looked away quickly, embarrassed. It is not for romance, she muttered. Jory, standing in the yard, smiled openly. It can be for peace, he said. Mara did not argue. That peace attracted another shadow. Talia returned in June, when humidity made every thought feel sticky. She arrived in a rented car and stepped onto Mara's porch as if reclaiming a stage. She looked older, but not softer. Time had carved sharper lines around her mouth. Mother, she said, voice sweetened like medicine. I heard you are getting married. Mara did not invite her inside. Jory stood near the gate, calm but ready. I stepped onto the porch behind Mara. Talia's eyes flicked to me and brightened with opportunism. Noah, she said, as if my name were a leash. My son. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You do not get to call me that, I said. Talia's smile faltered. I made mistakes, she said quickly. I was young. I was desperate. Mara's voice was quiet and sharp. We were all desperate, she replied. Some of us stayed. Talia swallowed, then shifted tactics. She spoke about regret, about hardship, about needing family. The word family sounded like a coin she hoped to spend. Talia did not leave after one refusal. She rented a room at the inn by the highway and began appearing in town like a rumor given legs. She asked the cooperative about my earnings. She visited county offices for records. She spoke to neighbors who had always been eager for gossip and offered them a new story. Mara had stolen her child. Mara had profited from my success. Mara owed her compensation for lost motherhood. It might have worked in a place where people loved scandal more than justice, but Linford had also watched Mara work for years. Even the cruelest neighbors had eaten her porridge at some point. People began to answer Talia with silence, which is the closest thing a small town has to exile. Then the legal notice arrived. A claim of parental rights with a demand for financial support and recognition of maternal contribution. Talia's lawyer called to discuss amicable resolution. I laughed, humorless. She abandoned me, I said. There is nothing amicable about that. The lawyer responded with smooth phrases about growth and second chances. I asked him whether second chances could be issued without first acknowledging harm. He did not answer. Lysa prepared for the hearing with the patience of someone who enjoyed dismantling lies. In court, Talia arrived in soft colors and a fragile expression, performing regret with careful timing. Her lawyer spoke about hardship but never mentioned the bus station. When I took the stand, I described the fan, the water cup, the hours, the oranges in Mara's hand. I did not dramatize. I told the truth plainly, because the truth does not need decoration. The judge denied the claim. Talia's face tightened, then collapsed into anger that looked more honest than her tears. After the ruling, I found Talia by the river alone. She looked smaller without her lawyer, her shoulders curved inward like a person finally meeting the weight of her own choices. When she saw me, she tried to smile. So you've chosen her, she said. Bitterness automatic. I didn't choose, I replied. She chose. Every day. Talia stared at the water. You think I didn't love you, she whispered. I felt a strange, tired compassion, the kind that arrives when anger has burned itself out. Love isn't what you say, I said. It's what you do when it costs you. Talia's eyes glistened. For a moment, she looked like someone who might have been different under different conditions. Then she asked quietly, Can you tell her I'm sorry? I shook my head. You tell her, I said. Not with words, with distance, with leaving us alone. She flinched, as if that request hurt more than rejection. The week of Mara and Jory's registration lunch, the sky stayed clear, as if the river itself wanted to celebrate. The hall by the water was small, decorated with paper lanterns and cheap flowers that still looked beautiful because they were chosen with care. Dev complained about carrying tables but did it anyway. Lysa brought a cake and warned everyone not to ask her about her love life. Mara wore a pale blue blouse and lipstick she rarely used. Jory looked nervous, like a teenager. When the clerk asked if anyone objected, Dev raised his hand and said, Only if you spell her name wrong. We will riot. People laughed, and Mara's eyes shone with something like relief. She had spent so long fighting that Joy felt suspicious. I stood beside her when she signed the register. Her hand trembled slightly, but her signature was bold. That, I realized, was her true legacy. She had written herself into the world even when the world tried to erase her. On the anniversary of the day Mara found me, we went to the Welleridge bus station together. The ceiling fan had been replaced. The seats were newer. The kiosk now sold expensive coffee. The city had updated its skin, but the bones were the same. People arriving, leaving, carrying entire lives in bags. Mara held a paper bag of oranges because she refused to change that part. She handed me one and said, Do you remember? I nodded. I remember being thirsty, I said. Mara smiled sadly. I remember being late, she replied. I ran as fast as I could. I wanted to tell her she did not need to apologize for time she could not control, but I understood now why she had. She had apologized not for her delay, but for the world's cruelty. We sat on the bench under the new fan. and I watched it rotate smoothly. The station felt less like a wound. Not healed, exactly, but stitched. "What do you want now?" Mara asked. I thought about Shoreline, about contracts and courtrooms, about the ways power had tried to claim us. I thought about my own life, finally large enough to include rest. "I want to build things that can't be taken by paperwork," I said. Mara nodded once. "All right," she said. "Build, and keep your door open for the people who carried you, not for the ones who dropped you." When we left the station, the air smelled of rain, though the sky was still bright. I carried the bag of oranges. Mara walked slowly beside me, her cane tapping a steady rhythm. Not the rhythm of defeat, but the rhythm of a person who had survived every attempt to shrink her. I realized that the story I had been chasing was never about revenge. It was about authorship. It was about who gets to name you, who gets to claim you, and whether you accept their handwriting on your life. Mara had signed my days with work, with stubborn love, with the quiet insistence that a child abandoned on a bench could still become someone. Behind us, the fan kept turning. Ahead, the road was ours, not because anyone granted it, but because we had earned the right to walk it. Before Shoreline ever existed as code, it existed as small habits Mara drilled into me the way some people drill prayers. She made me count coins out loud so I would learn that numbers were not shameful. She made me repeat addresses of customers so I would learn that places mattered, that people were not just faces but coordinates in a world that pretended to misplace them. When the cooperative manager frowned at our late payment, Mara did not plead. She asked for a meeting, brought the ledger, and calmly mapped what we could pay each week. She treated poverty like an engineering problem and refused to let it become a moral stain. I learned to do the same. When Vance Hoyt opened his stall, I expected Mara to fight him directly, to shout, to accuse, to make it a street war. She did not. She studied his hours, his suppliers, the way he laughed with customers. Then she adjusted her own cart like a sailor adjusting sails. She added a second dish, a sweet rice bowl that took longer to make but drew office workers who wanted dessert. She rearranged her display so steam rose like an invitation. She gave children tiny paper fans on hot days so their parents would linger. "Competition is noise," she told me, "but hunger is real. Feed the real thing." Vance's stall lasted 6 months. Mara's lasted years. The night Mara's heart warned her, I slept on a plastic chair in the clinic hallway, knees tucked under my chin, listening to the sound of other people's emergencies. Mara lay inside with a monitor beeping politely, as if even her body had learned to be careful not to disturb anyone. When the doctor told her to stop lifting heavy things, she nodded and then, the next morning, tried to lift the flour sack anyway. I argued. She snapped. Then she softened and touched my cheek. "I am not stubborn," she said. "I am afraid. If I stop, everything stops." That was the first time I understood fear could wear the face of diligence. At university, I learned how quickly people treat hardship as an aesthetic. Classmates spoke about grit the way they spoke about vintage jackets, as something admirable from a safe distance. I worked nights in a cafeteria because scholarship money only looked generous on paper. When I called Mara, I did not tell her about the blisters on my hands. I told her about my grades and the view from the library window. She told me about the river level and the price of cooking oil. Her voice made ordinary details feel like love. In my dorm, I taped her words above my desk. "Do not let anyone write your story for free." Shoreline began with a mistake. A friend and I volunteered at a shelter and noticed the kitchen was short on bread while the campus cafeteria threw away trays of rolls at closing. We carried bags by hand, sweaty and late, and felt stupid about how simple the gap was. I wrote a crude script that matched surplus to need based on time and distance. It was ugly code, but it moved food. When the first driver arrived with warm rice to a shelter that expected nothing, a woman there grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Thank you for remembering we exist." I went back to my dorm and cried. Not because I was proud, but because I was furious at how avoidable hunger was. Calder-Wynn's contract was not just predatory. It was elegant. It offered a partnership and quietly demanded ownership of our routing data, which meant ownership of the knowledge of where hunger lived. It demanded a right of first refusal on all future expansions, which meant we could never choose a neighborhood without asking permission. It included a clause about public relations alignment, which meant if the company wanted to pretend the program was theirs, we would have to smile on camera. I showed the contract to Mara. She read it slowly and then said, "They want to buy your map, so they can decide which people are allowed to eat." That sentence made my decision easier. Orson's petition used phrases that made my stomach hurt. He called Mara an informal caretaker. He called my childhood an arrangement. He called my scholarship a windfall. He called Shoreline a monetized platform. The papers treated love like a loophole and treated money like proof. Lysa, who had seen too many families torn apart by polite language, made me practice answering questions without letting the room reshape my story. They will try to make you sound ungrateful, she warned. Do not perform gratitude. Tell facts. So I told the court facts. How Mara woke before dawn. How she negotiated repayment plans. How she carried me through fevers. How she refused to sell my future even when it would have been easier. After the ruling, retaliation arrived through the town's favorite weapon: inconvenience. A new safety inspection shut down Mara's porch dispatch corner for 3 days. A permit clerk lost our paperwork twice. A supplier raised prices without explanation. Dev nearly exploded and said he would like to staple certain people to their own clipboards. Mara watched the chaos, then surprised us by laughing. Good, she said. If they are bothering to slow us down, it means we are moving. She taught us to treat obstruction as proof of motion, not a reason to stop. Talia's return carried the smell of desperation rather than strategy. She tried to speak like someone who had matured, but every sentence included a hidden invoice. She said she had been misled by men, as if her choices were debts someone else owed. She said she had never stopped thinking of me, as if thoughts counted the way groceries did. When she realized Mara would not bend, she shifted to me, turning her eyes watery and her voice soft. Noah, she said. I am still your mother. I heard the old water cup in her tone, the desire to manage my needs rather than meet them. I wanted to shout. Instead, I said, Mara did not raise me to be cruel, but she did raise me to be honest. I do not know you. I do not trust you. And you do not get to demand love like a refund. Talia did not accept the boundary quietly. The next day, she showed up at the dispatch corner during volunteer training, smiling like a sponsor. She told teenagers she was proud of them. She told elders she had always supported education. She tried to place her hand on Mara's shoulder like ownership. Mara stepped aside so smoothly it looked like dance. Do not touch me, Mara said, voice low, not angry but final. The room went silent. Talia laughed too loudly and said, We are family, Mother. Mara looked at the volunteers. Family is what you do, not what you announce, she replied. Then she handed a teenager a clipboard and asked him to read the route list aloud. Work resumed. Talia stood there a moment, excluded not by violence but by purpose, and finally left. The second hearing, the one Talia forced by appealing, was where she tried to weaponize emotion. She brought a photo album with glossy pictures of herself in city cafes, as if proximity to modern life proved maternal competence. She cried on cue. Her lawyer spoke about regret and transformation. The judge listened, then asked a question that cut through theater. Where have you been for the last 18 years? Talia stuttered, blamed money, blamed men, blamed pride. Mara did not interrupt. When it was Mara's turn, she did not accuse. She described the winter when the heater broke and she warmed bricks in the oven to put under my blanket. She described the day she sold her ring and told me it had gone missing so I would not feel guilty. She described my first scholarship letter and how she sat on the porch afterward, hands shaking, whispering thank you to nobody. The judge's eyes softened. The appeal died quietly, like a candle running out of wax. In Crestwick, Calderwin tried to reinvent his reputation by funding a glossy hunger initiative with branded tote bags. He invited politicians to cut ribbons. He hired influencers to smile beside pantry shelves. It might have worked if he had not underestimated how bored people were with being lied to. Lysa obtained internal emails showing Wynn had targeted Shoreline specifically to acquire routing data and suppress independent networks. She published them with careful redactions and brutal clarity. The city council, eager to avoid scandal, opened a formal inquiry. Donors who hated bad press pulled out. Wynn's initiative collapsed into press releases and excuses. Calder sent me a final message. You could have been somebody. I did not reply. Dev printed it and taped it to the wall above the coffee machine, then wrote in marker underneath. We already are. Orson attempted one last gambit. He returned to Linford with a suitcase and a story about starting over. He said he wanted to sponsor a scholarship in Mara's name. He offered to buy a new van for Shoreline deliveries. The offers were almost convincing, like counterfeit money that looked real from a distance. Mara invited him to sit on the porch and poured him tea. Then she asked him a single question. Why now? Orson smiled. Because I regret, he said. Mara nodded as if considering. Then she gestured toward the street. The people you tried to scare are out there delivering food, she said. If you regret, apologize to them. Apologize without cameras. Apologize without contracts. Then leave. Orson's smile collapsed. He stood too quickly, knocking over his tea. The cup shattered. The sound was small, but it felt like a verdict. He left without cleaning the mess. Mara picked up the broom, swept the shards into a dustpan, and carried them to the bin like she had done with every broken promise in her life. As Shoreline grew, we learned that success is not the absence of struggle. It is the presence of systems that share it. We built a cooperative board. We rotated leadership. We paid drivers. We taught teenagers to code simple routing scripts so they could see technology as a tool, not a gate. The dispatch corner became a classroom on weekends. Mara insisted on one rule. No one could be mocked for not knowing. Ignorance is not a crime, she said, tapping her cane for emphasis. Cruelty is. It was a rule I wished the world had taught my mother long ago. On nights when I stayed late, I would find Mara asleep in a chair, a root sheet folded on her lap like a lullaby. I would cover her with a blanket and feel something inside me unclench. The registration lunch for Mara and Jory was followed by a quiet ritual of our own. After guests left, Mara asked me to walk with her to the river. Jory followed at a respectful distance, giving us space the way good partners do. Mara stood at the water's edge and held out her hand. In her palm was a small object, a metal token from the cooperative, stamped with a simple emblem. This was the first receipt they gave me when I borrowed against the house, she said. I kept it as proof that I did not imagine the debt. She closed her fist around it and then opened her hand again, offering it to me. I do not want you to inherit fear, she said. I shook my head. Keep it, I whispered. Mara smiled. Then we bury it, she decided. We dug a small hole under a river stone and placed the token inside. It was not superstition. It was symbolism. It was Mara saying the debt no longer defined us. On the drive home, Mara looked out the window at Linford's uneven streets and said, almost casually, You know, I never hated Talia. Hate takes energy. I use that energy to keep you warm. I swallowed hard. Do you ever miss her? I asked. Mara considered. I miss the version of her I hoped she would be, she said. But hope is not the same as reality. She reached over and patted my hand. Listen to me, Noah. People will try to claim you when you are valuable. They will call it love. When that happens, ask them what they did when you were not valuable. Ask them where they were when you were 5 and thirsty and afraid. Their answer is the only map you need. I nodded, eyes burning, and the road ahead blurred for a moment. Not from rain, but from gratitude I did not have words big enough to contain. We returned to the Welleridge bus station on a day that looked ordinary enough to fool anyone who did not carry memories like stones. Mara insisted we take the early bus from Linford, the one with cracked vinyl seats and an impatient driver, because she said comfort was not the point. When we arrived, the station smelled of coffee and disinfectant, and the ceiling fan above the ticket booth spun smoothly now. No squeak, no stutter, as if someone had finally decided that small malfunctions deserved to be fixed. Mara walked slowly to the row of seats where she had found me years ago. She sat down carefully. I sat beside her. For a while, we watched strangers move through their own beginnings and endings. A young woman argued on the phone near the vending machine, tears in her eyes. A man carried a sleeping child across the floor, careful with the weight. A boy about 5 years old wandered too far from his guardian and looked around with a terror that made my chest tighten. His guardian snapped at him, pulled him back, scolded him for being inconvenient. I felt my hands clench before I could stop them. Mara noticed. She touched my wrist. Do not rescue every ghost, she murmured. Rescue the living when you can. She reached into her bag and placed 2 oranges on the seat beside her, bright and stubborn. Then she took a small card from her pocket, one of our Shoreline volunteer cards, and wrote a short note on the back. If you need help, ask anyone in a blue vest. We do not leave people behind. She slid the note under the oranges like a secret for the next desperate person who might look down and believe the world was not entirely cruel. As we stood to leave, I felt something loosen in me. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but a quiet acceptance that my origin did not have to be my cage. Outside, rain finally arrived, soft and steady, cooling the pavement. Mara lifted her face into it and laughed, a small laugh that sounded like relief. Jory held an umbrella over her anyway. I watched them walk ahead, two people choosing each other late and without apology. Behind them, I carried the bag of remaining oranges and the weight of everything Mara had done, and for the first time the weight did not feel like a debt. It felt like inheritance in the best sense. Not money, not property, but a way of moving through the world with stubborn tenderness. When my phone buzzed with a Shoreline alert about a delayed delivery, I answered calmly,